Hello and welcome back to the Jolly Franchers YouTube channel. I'm James Franch, the solo developer of the murder mystery RPG Kid Detective. This week on Making Monkey Island, we are going to start covering an inventory system that works alongside the free visual scripting tool called Fungus. I learned game development through Fungus, and ever since then I've heard people asking for a working inventory system that can work with it. So let me give you a demonstration of what we're going to learn how to make in the next coming few episodes. In the next couple videos, we will learn the original Monkey Island had 12 verbs. They cut it down to 9 in the remake. As you can see, walk to is one of our big verbs, but if we pull up the inventory, we get use. Book of Souls is my inventory item. And we can not only use Book of Souls with other inventory items. You see, if I try to use the Book of Souls with the keys, that's nothing. Of course, that wouldn't make sense. But if I close the inventory, I can also use items on things in the environment. And that does nothing, because the Book of Souls wouldn't do anything on a door. But if I come over here to this chair, oh look, a ticket. And I've gotten a ticket added to my inventory. And now, if I use the ticket with the keys, now this is something. And now I have a key ticket in my inventory. So we have combinable items. If I use the key ticket on the desk, the key goes into this tiny lock on the desk. So we can use items, we can combine them, we can use them with things in the environment. This is the inventory system. When we are in dialogue, we can even pull up the inventory. We can't do anything while we're in dialogue because we're already in a cutscene. But you could use something like that so that even if a player is in dialogue, you could have a save and quit button in your menu during the game. So this week, we are going to learn how to make the inventory, how it looks, and we're going to learn how to open and close it so that it works during dialogue, so that our player doesn't move when it's open and they start moving again when it's closed. When we close it during dialogue, our player doesn't start moving during dialogue, since we want to keep them stationary during cutscenes. And we'll begin to touch on some methods to fill our item slots with items and so on, but we will finish the inventory in probably one more video, maybe two. So with all that said, if you're enjoying this video series, please like, subscribe, turn on the post notification bell, leave comments below on how much you're liking the videos or what you want to see. And if you're enjoying it, please share this channel with your friends, because I would love to teach people how to make games like Monkey Island. They're so great. So without further ado, let's get into the video for today. Okay, a few things before we start. I have added some more clickables to my game, and I can show you how I have done so, just to go over the process. But you can see we have no indication if we're hovering over something that's clickable or not. Say this wall lamp, if I go over, I don't have any dialogue with it, or this beautiful view. So that's what we're going to fix with the text that you saw in the demonstration down here at the bottom of the screen, which is something that Monkey Island had, to really let you know what you were doing. Some minor changes that I've made to the clickables. Let's go here to the clickable. I've put them in their own sorting layer. They were in the default sorting layer, and I found that it was better to have them in a sorting layer that was in front of everything else. So what I did was I went down here to add sorting layer, and I pressed the plus button here, and I made a new sorting layer that was above the default sorting layer, and I called it clickables. And that's where all your clickables can go. Okay, Now that that clickable business is out of the way, we can go ahead and start making the inventory. So if we create a new canvas and we go into scene view, make sure your canvas isn't childed under anything else and it just is sitting on its own. So if we go in here to the scene view, we can see our tiny little scene. And if we click on the canvas, it zooms out very huge. And this box is a representation of the screen, of your screen, and how the UI will lay over it. So let's just create a quick and dirty inventory. I'm going to go down here and create a panel. And I'm going to just quickly make it look good, at least to me. I'm going to drag it nice and small. I'm going to drag it around so that it anchors to the very center of the screen. I can go ahead and change its color to a nice grayish, and I'll keep it fairly transparent so that we can see what's underneath the inventory. And let's go ahead and name this canvas inventory. And we are going to need item slots in our inventory. We're going to need to create general item slots for when we get items, they will fill up the slots one by one until the inventory is full. Let's go ahead. As you can see, I've already created an item slot script. Let's go ahead and add a grid layout group to this panel so that our item slots will be evenly spaced and fill our inventory panel like a nice little grid. How delightful. And we're going to want our inventory slots to be buttons because we're going to want to click on our items to be able to do something with the items. So let's go ahead and create a new button. If you don't know how to use TextMesh Pro, there are videos out there, or if you aren't interested in using the wonderful world of TextMesh Pro and all that it has to offer you, you can go ahead and use the normal button. But I'm going to use a TextMesh Pro button, and I'm going to go ahead and name this button Item Slot, and I am going to drag it in here, and it automatically is going to lock in place. I can't even manage to drag this thing around because of the grid layout group that I put on this. And if you open up this padding section right here, you can change the spacing of the button from side to side, top to bottom, however you'd like. You can change the cell size, making the inventory slots a similar size. You could also just not use this grid layout group and place your panels however you please. It is up to you, but I thought I'd just display this nice and easy tool to make something look good fast. So in my item slot, I'm going to want the text of whatever item I have, but I'm just going to drag that down to the bottom because up at the top, I'm going to want an image of the item in that inventory slot. So I'm going to right-click on my item slot, and I'm going to create a new UI element, which is an image. And I'm going to make sure that image is childed under the item slot so that when I click this arrow, it disappears, and when I open it, it appears. And I'm going to name this item icon and press enter, and I'm going to name the text box item name, and I'm going to press enter. So let's just change the item icon so that it sits right above the item name. There we go. We should leave the color of this default image as white so that whatever icon we add doesn't look like a darkened or red version of the icon. It just looks like the plain icon. And we can change the item name to whatever text we want. And I'm going to go ahead and change the color of the item slot button as well, just to make things look a little nicer, because I know that makes a tutorial more appealing when you can see an inventory system and actually think, well, that looks good enough to be in a real game. And I'm going to go ahead and make the item icon the same width as height, so that the icon, when it comes in, isn't distorted. I'm going to delete these right after, but just to demonstrate, you see when I duplicate these item slots, they automatically fill out the layout on their own. Okay, I've made 10 buttons because that's just the way it nicely worked out for me here. Here are the spacings that I used to achieve this. Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and delete all these other item slots for now because I don't want to have to put the item slot script on them one by one. So for now, let's go up here and let's make our inventory script. Now, in this instance, I've already made an inventory script. So let's go inside of it and let me explain what's going on in here. So at the top of our inventory script, these are the namespaces that we are using. We are using Fungus because we have to reference flowcharts. And we are using system.link namespace because I wanted to convert an array to a list. If you don't know coding terms, you don't have to worry about that one, but you will need to use the namespace if you are copying this code, and if you're trying to learn how it works, system.link is just a helpful namespace like Fungus that comes with various methods that you can use to get around some of C#'s finicky qualities. Up here, you can see all of the variables that we want to create here. We're going to create a list of menu dialogues in our scene. We haven't used menu dialogues so far, but menu dialogues are option buttons. Say, if you went up to a chair in our scene and two option buttons appeared that said, take a seat or not right now, we would do that in Fungus using menu dialogues. So if we go over here to the chair, we press the plus button, under narrative, there are menu commands. The reason I included this variable in the inventory script is because when we open the inventory, we want to pause the menu dialogues while our inventory is open. Same with say dialogues, which are our text boxes, so that when we open the inventory, our say dialogues pause while the inventory is open, and when we open it again, or when we close the inventory, the dialogue can continue from right where we left off. Here I have a public reference to a canvas group component, which we have not added to our inventory. So let's go here to our inventory, the canvas that the inventory is sitting on, and I'm going to go down here and I am going to add a canvas group component. And as you can see, if we go to our scene view and we click on our inventory so that we're looking at it again, the canvas group component controls whether the canvas group blocks raycasts. Blocking raycasts means that anything that's clickable, any clickable object that's underneath the inventory, will be temporarily blocked by the inventory opening up. And when we close the inventory, we are going to want to stop blocking raycasts. Even though the inventory will be invisible over the camera, it will still block raycasts if we don't tell it not to. We won't want the inventory to be interactable when it's closed, and will want it to be interactable when it's open. And the alpha, if we set it to 0, will make the inventory invisible. And if we set it to 1, it'll make it visible again. So this canvas group, these three variables right here, are what we're going to want to control when we turn on and off our inventory, when we open and close it in the game. So that's why we have this canvas group variable, and that's what we're going to use it for. This private target variable is a reference to our point and click controller, which we named target for stupid reasons. because we're going to want to, when we open the inventory, we're not going to want our character to be walking while it's open, while we're clicking on items in our inventory. We aren't going to want our player to walk towards those items. Here are references to scripts that we'll talk about later. We're going to make an inventory item script, and we're going to make an item slot script, which will fill with the inventory items that we have and will clear when we don't have those items anymore. And those are both lists indicated by this bracket. And if you're new to coding, if you put brackets after something like this, it creates an array of items, which means that this variable can hold multiple, in this case, inventory items. But you could make a list of anything, like booleans or integers or any of the variables we've used so far. And here in the start method, we are going to find all of the menu dialogues in our scene. We're going to find all of the say dialogues in our scene by using find objects of type, which will find all of the say dialogues and all of the menu dialogues in our scene and save them in our variables. We are going to get the canvas group component off of this game object so that we can reference it. We are going to find object of type target, which is our point and click character. And we are going to find objects of type flowchart in our scene so that we can search through all of the flowcharts in our scene to look for what blocks we want to execute when we combine items. So in our update method, the only thing we're going to want here is if we press the inventory button, then we're going to want to toggle the inventory. As you can see, I have made a method here called toggle inventory, which takes in a true or false parameter. So don't worry about this yet. We are about to go through the toggle inventory method. So if you type this in and your script is throwing errors at you down here, don't worry, we're going to get to that. And as for this, you may be wondering, well, what is the inventory button? How could Unity possibly know what I'm talking about when I just type in the word inventory? And that's because I added it using Unity's handy input system. So if you go up here to Edit, Project Settings, and you go over here to Input Manager on the side, you will see here a list of keywords. And as you can see, I've created one here called inventory. And this is so I can easily change the buttons that correspond to opening the inventory. Here I have tab and an alternate button, which is I, or you could put escape if you want your inventory to hold the menu for saving and quitting and stuff like that. The way I added this inventory button is I right-clicked here on this submit one, and I duplicated the array element. And as you can see, now there are 3 submit options. And I went in here and I inventory. And if I wanted to reference my inventory button, I would have to put in my script inventory, exactly how I spelled it with capitals and all here, and it will know what you are talking about. So back to our toggle inventory method. And we can see that when we press the button, we want the inventory to turn on or off depending on whether the inventory is open already or whether it's not. And as you can see here, I'm determining that by the canvas group's interactable state. So if the inventory is interactable at the moment, then I want to do the opposite of that, which is what this exclamation mark represents. So if the inventory is interactable, then I want to turn it off. And if it's not interactable, then I want to turn the inventory on. So I created a private void toggle inventory that passes in this Boolean variable, which I called setting. Whether we want to set the inventory to on or off will be determined by this Boolean variable up here that we're passing in. So first thing that happens in our toggle inventory method is another method called toggle canvas group. So let's go down, and it demands a canvas group and a setting, which luckily we have the setting from our toggle inventory method already. And this will set the canvas group's alpha, which we were looking at previously. It makes it invisible or visible. It will set the interactable to whatever the setting is, and it will set the inventory to block raycasts when it needs to and not block raycasts when it's closed, so that we can click on things again. So that's the toggle canvas group method. The next thing here in toggle inventory is a method called Initialize item slots, and we can scroll down right underneath and we can see the Initialize item slots method. So what Initialize item slots does is whenever we open or close the inventory, we want to refresh the inventory with the items that we own and the items that we don't anymore, because maybe we used them. So the first thing in this method is we want to get a list of the items that we own now, because it will change from time to time throughout the game as you use items and as you combine them. So here we're going to create a list of inventory items, and I'm going to call it owned items. And we're going to use another method that I made called get owned items. And we are going to pass in our inventory items list up here at the top, this array that we made of inventory items, which we made public so that when we make new items, we can add our new items. Each item we make, we can add them to this inventory items list that's sitting on our inventory script. And because those inventory items are in an array, which is in my opinion, it's a type of list, but in C# it doesn't understand that it is a type of thing which it calls a list. So this is why we use the system.link namespace, so that we can put this inventory items array into a list. And so we can do list type things with the inventory items. Don't worry about this so much. Let's go look at the get owned items method, which is right here. This method is a list in itself. This method generates a list. We are going to declare a new list called owned items that is a list of inventory items. This is just the syntax for making a new list. And now we are going to go through each inventory item in our list of inventory items. And this is why we had to convert our inventory items to a list, because owned items.add, this .add method doesn't work on arrays, but we want to be able to add items to our list. And so this is an easy way to do it, by using lists rather than arrays. So we're going to, for each inventory item in our inventory items list, we are going to check whether that item is owned, which if we go over here quickly to our inventory item script, each inventory item we make is going to have a variable that tells us whether we own the item or not. And so this is just going to quickly check if we own an item, then we want to add the item to our list because we own it. And this whole method just returns a list of owned items. And so now, back in initialized item slots, we have our list of owned items because of our fancy method that gives us our owned items. And now we are going to go through a for loop. And for loops took me a while to understand. But basically, we are going to create a new variable, which people frequently name I, because it stands for index. It's going to start at 0. That's what this part means. So a for statement will loop through this phrase a certain number of times. And the number of times we want it to loop is the amount of item slots that we have, because that's how many items we can possibly own at one time, is the amount of item slots we have and no more. So if the index number is less than item slots dot length, then we want to run this loop over and over until it's greater than item slots dot length. And every time we run this loop, this I++ means that we are going to add 1 to the index number. So the first time we run this loop, I will be 0, and the next time I will be 1, and the next time I will be 2, until we reach item slots dot length. And then we'll stop doing this for loop forever until the next time we initialize our item slots. And so each time we run the loop, we want to see if the index number is less than the number of owned items that we have in our owned items list. Well, then we want to display that item. But if the number of item slots we have is greater than the amount of owned items we have, well, then we want to clear that item slot. And the display item method and the clear item method are methods that are sitting on our item slot class. If you type this in and it throws an error, for now, it's because it does not know about the display item method or the clear item method yet, or what item slots are in general, because we haven't made that script yet. So you'll need to hang in there a little bit. It's probably going to throw a lot of errors because the inventory is very interconnected with a lot of different scripts. Okay, so let's go back up to our toggle inventory script. We've toggled the canvas group on or off. We've refreshed what items are in the inventory. And then if our player is not in a cutscene, and I went ahead and added a cutscene in progress variable to our target script so that I can tell exactly when we're in a cutscene. I already had a variable called in dialog, which keeps me from moving while I'm in dialogue, but I needed another one to keep track so that if there is a cutscene in progress and we open the inventory and we close the inventory again, then we don't want to set our player able to move when dialogue is still going on. We want to know if the player is in a cutscene and they close the inventory, we don't want the player to start moving again. So I went ahead and made a public bool called cutscene in progress in our target script where we keep our variables. In our exit dialog method, along with other things that we'll get to later, I added a cutscene in progress equals false, semicolon. And I also went ahead and made an enter dialog method, just in case we ever need to automatically make our player stop moving to enter a cutscene. So I just did the opposite of the exit dialog method. I made a public void called enter dialog, in dialog equals true, cutscene in progress equals true, and other things which we'll get to later. So, and because we make it public, we can call it from other scripts. We can call it from Fungus as well, if we trigger a cutscene automatically. I call this enter dialog method in our object clicked script. So let's go back to our object clicked script. Down here in the do execute block script, when we have clicked on something and we finally arrived, I went ahead and added target.cutscene in progress equals true. But I could have deleted both of these lines and added target.enter dialog parentheses like this and put a semicolon, because the enter dialog method is just these two things right now. So now that we know what cutscene in progress does, if the player is not inside a cutscene, well, then we want to set them, we want to make them not move when the inventory opens, and we want to make them move when the inventory closes, unless they're in a cutscene. If they're still in a cutscene, then we want them to stay not being able to move. And here is the part that allows the inventory to open and close and not affect the flow of fungus commands. So for each menu dialog in our menu dialogs list that we made, we're going to toggle canvas group, and we are going to get the component canvas group on each menu dialog, and we are going to set it to the opposite of whatever our setting here is, because when the inventory is open, we're going to want the menu dialogs to be invisible, and when the inventory is closed, we're going to want them to be visible. So that's why this exclamation point is setting it to whatever the opposite of the inventory is. So that is going to go ahead and handle the menu dialogs opening and closing every time we toggle the inventory. For our say dialogs, for each say dialog in our say dialogs list, I went ahead and I slightly tampered with the say dialog script, and I added a variable called dialog enabled. And I will go ahead and show you why by double-clicking here on the say dialog script. So here's our say dialog script. If we go down here to line 86, right after that, I added a custom member, which should say custom member. I'll go ahead and save that. I added a custom member to the say dialog script, and it is a public bool dialog enabled equals true. And then I went down and I used this Boolean variable in a method on line 202 of the say dialog script that's called update alpha. And as we know from our canvas groups, alpha determines whether something is visible or invisible at any given time. And so the say dialog was updating the alpha constantly so that it's visible when it's in dialog. When you have a say command active, it's keeping the say dialog visible no matter what. So I went here and I added one line on line 204. If dialog enabled is false, then return from this method. Don't do return means we don't want to do anything after this in the method. We don't want to update the alpha of the say dialog box. So this is the fix that I did to make sure that I could open and close my inventory or my menu at any time and still use Fungus dialog. This works in visual novels or whatever you're making in Fungus. I haven't had any problems with it yet, and I've been using this method for over a year now. So for each say dialog in our say dialogs list, for every text box we're using in our game, it's going to go ahead and make sure that the dialog box stays invisible. We are going to set the time scale to 0, which might mess with any animations that you do in your inventory, but it's going to keep Fungus from typing out the text in the text box. It's going to keep Fungus in the same place in its command list. If you set the time scale of Unity to 0 while the inventory is on, and if it's off, we're going to set the time scale back to 1, which means the passage of time will happen as expected. You can also use time.timescale for, as it says, this can be used for slow motion effects. And once again, we are going to toggle canvas group to the opposite of our inventory, so that when the inventory is open, the dialog box is invisible, and when it's closed, the dialog box is visible again. So this is everything you need to know about the inventory script right now. The only other thing in here comes later, and it is this combine items method, but I will cover that later when we actually have items in our inventory. So if we go into our game, right now our inventory is open as soon as we enter the game, and that's because we want to set these things to look like this when we begin the game. So let me just go out, and I'm going to set the alpha to 0, interactable to false, and blocks raycast to false. And let's just open and close our inventory because we can now. So here I am in game. I'm walking around. I open my inventory using the I button. Our button does not do anything yet, and that's fine. We haven't hooked it up. And when I click around, my character doesn't move. When I close the inventory, my character does move. When I enter dialog and I open the inventory, the dialog disappears and nothing happens and I can't move. And when I close the inventory, I still can't move, and the dialog is right back to where it was when we started. And because we call the exit block method when the dialog stops, we can move again. So this is the basics of how to create an inventory that works with Fungus. You can use this with the classic visual novel style of Fungus. You can use this with anything you use Fungus with. This is the method for creating a main menu you can open at any time while using Fungus. It might not be easy, but it works. Okay, next time we are going to cover item slots and items. Perhaps we'll have to split up the verbs walk to and use inventory items into another video. Inventory is really complex and it'll take me a while to fully cover it all. If your inventory isn't working this week, that's understandable because the initialize item slots method uses scripts that we haven't made yet together. So if you want your inventory to open and close right now without throwing errors, you can just comment out the initialize item slots method with 2 backslashes, and your game will forget about it for the time being. But it won't forget about those variables, that list of item slots and that list of inventory items that we put on the inventory script. So you might want to comment out any mentions of those things, or just not put them yet, because I will cover them in the next episode. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next week, stay jolly!